There is only one God. He resides deep inside all objects and beings. He is everywhere and is the inner self of all. So says the Adviata Upanishad 6:11. And that verse there explains to us a little bit about the Hindu concept of Adviata Vedanta. Adviata Vedanta, Advaita meaning not to and Vedanta meaning knowledge, is the idea that God exists within all living things. And in this video, we are going to look a little bit at the idea of Advaita Vedanta and how it was developed and the key scholar, Adi Shankara, who developed that during the 8th century. So Advaita Vedanta is the concept that actually within all living things is God, that God exists within life itself and within the whole universe. All is God. God is all. And that idea, from a Hindu perspective, fits in with the jnana path to yoga. Knowledge and understanding of the idea that God exists within all is what will ultimately lead to moksha for those that follow Advaita Vedanta and follow the jnana path to yoga. So who was Adi Shankara and how did he develop the idea of Advaita Vedanta? Well, Shankara was born in around 700 CE, so we would recognise him as fitting into the 8th century pretty well, and the estimated date of his death is around 750 CE. Now, he is the most renowned scholar of the Advaita Vedanta movement. He studied extensively the Upanishads and found that actually the idea of God being within all living things was very clear right the way through many of the Upanishads. He was influenced heavily by a lot of dharmic teaching in his youth. There were many gurus around Shankara who taught the idea that Dharma was the way to God. The Dharma was the way to please God. And this idea of duty, of living one's, the life that one ought to lead in your stage of life, Shankara felt could potentially lead to quite a materialistic outlook. Shankara felt that actually, rather than it being all about duty, that being a true Hindu, being a good Hindu, was about understanding God, knowing God, being able to, connect with the idea that God was in fact in all things. He became a disciple of a Shaivite whose name was Govind Bhagavatada, and through his teaching he became a real deep scholar of the Upanishads. He wrote a lot of commentaries, in particular on the Mukhya Upanishads, which are the principal Upanishads. And within that, he became even more convinced of this teaching that God exists within all living things. Shankara used these teachings to teach others, and in particular to campaign against the growing popularity of Buddhism in India in the 8th century. Buddhism, as we know, has some similar teachings to Advaita Vedanta, but removes the idea of God from it. Shankara fought against this atheistic ideal of Buddhism, claiming that actually what Buddhists did was to ignore the divine which exists within all of us, and that key element should be the focus of all Hindu thought. Within an Advaita Vedanta philosophy, it is true to say that Brahman is the only true reality. And so therefore, for Shankara, Buddhists, by having an atheistic ideal, were ignoring the one true reality. So let's explore that idea a little bit further of, what is reality? Because Shankara had some clear ideas on this, and he actually ended up teaching around the 3 levels of reality. So Brahman, he says, is the only true reality, and anything other than Brahman, therefore, is falsehood, or the Sanskrit term there is maya, illusion. Brahman is real, and the world is unreal. That's one of the great utterances of the Mahavakyas. And Shankara says that to truly understand God, to truly attain this kind of jnana path to yoga, you have to understand the nature of reality and illusion. So, what is reality? Shankara says there are 3 levels of reality. Level number 1 is the illusory level of reality. Now, we all understand that when we dream something at night, it's not real. When I wake up thinking I've just won the lottery or, just bought myself a nice new, I don't know, Porsche or something, then I know that these things aren't real. And that is the illusory level of reality for Shankara. He says these are things that we know are not true. Dreams, daydreams, imaginings, that imaginary friend that you've had for many years but you don't tell anyone about, that is all part of the illusory level of reality. Most people recognize that that's false. Shankara says that is really our imagination, and whilst that is okay, it is not real. So what's the second level of reality? The second level of reality is the mundane level of reality, and that is the world that we can observe visibly. Remember, as part of Adviata Vedanta, the idea is that God is not observable. God is not some physical thing to reach out. God, according to Shankara, is non-corporeal. He doesn't have a body. He's not a physical being. And so this second level of reality, the mundane reality, is that we can sense through our five senses, the things that we can see, the things that we can touch, and yes, even the things that we can smell. And we superimpose the idea of God into this mundane reality, says Shankara. So we might look at the world and see the divine, but that is merely us superimposing that onto the mundane reality. God's essence is not seen in the world, says Shankara, but it is known through Jnana Yoga, that path of knowledge. So we kind of superimpose our beliefs about God into the world. When we see the clouds parting and the light pouring through, we superimpose the idea of a mighty and powerful God. But actually, Shankara would probably extend that even to some of the Murti worship that was very popular and is popular within Bhakti tradition, because even that is part of the mundane reality. And that illusion that is within the world around us keeps us ignorant to the knowledge of God. The third level of reality, however, is the ultimate level of reality. And of course, at the ultimate level of reality, there is only one thing. And that thing is Brahman, because Brahman is the only reality. We are part of Brahman, and the mundane reality can distract us from that. If the whole goal of life is to be united with Brahman and that knowledge, then the material things around us might be distracting. Be it the idea of houses and having a house and having a bigger house, having more money, having more possessions, anything can be a distraction, or even just how good this soy sauce tastes. That can be a distraction from the idea of God. And what Shankara says is that we need to focus only on the idea of ultimate reality. Some Hindus worship God as Saguna. He has physical attributes, as opposed to the Advaita tradition where God is Nirguna. He does not have physical attributes. And what Shankara said was that where you worship God as Saguna and having those physical attributes, actually you are working at a lower level of understanding, because it stops you from realizing that Brahman is in fact within. You are looking for Brahman outside, but in fact Brahman is within. The ultimate reality, therefore, could be the level that's referred to in the Upanishads as the world of the gods. And that awareness of us being part of Brahman leads us out of samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, and allows us to attain moksha. At least that's what Shankara said. So seeking Brahman in the ultimate reality is the most important thing for Shankara. However, he says there is a trap that many people fall into, even being well-meaning, and that is the idea of adhyasa, superimposition. I once went on a camping trip with my wife, and our campsite was sort of a little higher up than the fields that were down below. And my wife turned to me and she said, "Oh, look down in the fields, there are horses in the fields." And I looked a little closer as we walked down this hill towards the field, and I realised that actually there weren't horses at all. There were feeding troughs that just looked quite tall. We've all done it. We've all seen something, we think, and then get closer and realise that is not the case. Actually, what we're doing is we're superimposing our ideas onto the things that we observe. Now, for Shankara, that is exactly the same as what we do when we look at the idea of God. If we think that God is just one element, then we are underplaying, misunderstanding, superimposing our ideas onto God. And by focusing in on only one aspect of God, Shankara says that we misunderstand. So, for example, if you just focus in on the idea of Shiva, then actually what you do is you misunderstand the whole idea of Brahman, because your focus is not on Brahman as one, that he is all, but actually it is only on one aspect of Brahman. McDermott in World Religion says thus: if I think a rope is a snake, I can continue to believe this until something in my experience contradicts the belief, such as the failure of the rope to move when trodden on. So until we seek Brahman through jnana yoga, we will continually do adhyasa. We will continually misunderstand the idea of what God is, because we are not seeking God through this jnana yoga to experience and know the idea that God is one with the world. We will still try and find empirical ways to measure God. We will try and work him out. We'll try and ascribe the attributes to him of a human being. But Shankara says we cannot do that. We have to escape that understanding. In fact, for Shankara, escaping that understanding of God as a physical is the way to attain moksha. Shankara himself defines adhyasa as the apparent presentation to consciousness by way of remembrance of something previously observed in some other form. So it's that idea of understanding God without those points of reference. And it's difficult to understand, isn't it? When you can't rely on anecdote or simile to kind of or metaphor to try and understand something which is spiritual. And that is why it is a spiritual quest as opposed to an empirical one. To conclude this, then, this is what Zaina says about the process that Shankara describes. Moksha, then, for an Advayatan does not mean that the soul merges into Brahman, as a river merges into the sea, but that it realizes itself as it eternally is, that is, the one Brahman Atman, which is absolute being, consciousness, and bliss. And it's that idea that Shankara was aiming for, that attainment of moksha through the realization that God and the world are one. There is only one ultimate reality, and that we have to cast off the mundane and focus in on that. And they are the teachings of Adi Shankara. So I hope those have been helpful reflections on the teachings of Adi Shankara and a little bit about Adviata Vedanta. There is, of course, far more that we can say about Adviata Vedanta. It's such a vast and fascinating philosophy. And maybe we'll do a future video exploring that idea a little bit more. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.